Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Any student must be allowed in any space or risk the loss of federal funding. That's what both public and private schools are now facing under the Biden administration's new interpretation of Title IX.
States are pushing back on the new requirements for schools regarding students who identify as transgender. Yesterday, 20 attorneys general sued the administration over a policy that could affect school meal programs. Heather Sells has the story.
The Biden administration wants all schools that receive federal help to provide open access to bathrooms, locker rooms, and sports based on students' self-perceived gender identity. That desire, however, is hitting some legal roadblocks.
There's really no compromise. Sex is either male or female, or, as the Biden administration is putting forward, the idea of sex can be overridden by gender identity. And gender identity is simply your self-perception.
Attorney Mary Rice Hassan has followed the administration's new interpretation of Title IX, a rule which flips the traditional understanding of sex-segregated spaces. The change forces both public and private schools that rely on federal funding to comply.
It's a confusing time for educators, both anyone who receives federal money.
That financial pipeline is worth millions, even billions, to some states. Tennessee, for example, receives $1.5 billion a year for K through 12, and its universities receive $88 million. It's why the state's attorney general has led 19 other states to fight the Education Department over its 2021 reinterpretation of Title IX. They argue that the Biden administration wrongly expanded on a 2020 Supreme Court decision known as Bostock. That ruling stated that under federal employment law, sex discrimination includes gender identity and sexual orientation. The Biden administration has expanded Bostock's reach to include Title IX and education. In early July, those 20 states got a reprieve when a federal judge put a temporary hold on the Biden administration's reinterpretation.
The federal court made really clear that the Biden administration had taken Bostock too far.
Attorney Christiana Kiefer has defended female track athletes forced to compete against boys in Connecticut. In September, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals will hear arguments in that case. For now, the states that sued the Biden administration can protect women's locker rooms, bathrooms, and sports teams. The other 30 states must allow any student in any space or risk the loss of funding.
It's not a good place to be. It's very troubling for parents. It's troubling for schools, even private schools that use federal dollars in some way.
Given the different cases and rules, schools face an ever-changing legal landscape. In the end, it could be up to the Supreme Court to decide these big questions about sexual orientation and gender identity. Gordon.
Well, Heather, Tennessee, 19 other states have sued over discrimination guidelines regarding school lunch programs. What's the concern?
This just came out yesterday, Gordon, and it's a similar playbook to what we saw in their lawsuit with the Department of Education policy. They're saying what is going to happen to schools that don't abide by this reinterpretation. Is their lunch money going to be held up? And so we'll see what happens with that lawsuit.
All right, well, the administration has now effectively changed Title IX, and it originally addressed sex discrimination in education, and specifically in college sports, and now it's going to include sexual orientation, gender identity. Let's go back to the Bostock decision. The facts underneath that is a employee, a male, with a beard, started identifying as female, and so he showed up with a beard in a dress to his job at a funeral home, taking care of grieving families. So the funeral home fired him, and then the Supreme Court said, well, sex means gender identity in employment law. You can't do that. So in a high school setting, can we expect boys to say, well, I'm now going to wear a dress, and so that allows me into the woman's locker room? Is that where we're going with this, and how do you think the Supreme Court will eventually decide it?
Yeah, such a big question right now. And in the Bostock decision, the Supreme Court explicitly said we are just talking about federal employment. We are not talking about Title IX. We are not talking about education. That's clearly in the Bostock decision. But the Biden administration says Bostock applies to Title IX. And so we, in the education world, we want to say that sex discrimination includes gender identity and sexual orientation. So that's what's at stake right now. And the Republican attorney generals are saying you can't make policy. That is for Congress to do. But the Biden administration is going ahead with this reinterpretation. Different lower courts, federal courts are beginning to question and disagree. And so if you see a lot of federal courts, lower courts disagreeing, it is most likely that it will end up in the Supreme Court.
Okay. Any suggestions for concerned parents? I mean, what do we do if the administration is going to use the school lunch program as a hammer to essentially change culture? What's a concerned parent to do?
Well, there's a couple avenues, and one is this is actually a public comment period on these changes. We've got a link on our CBN News website. So the government is taking public comment right now about these proposed changes, which aren't technically in effect yet. And this public comment period goes until September 12th. So there's that option. And then also is just parents talking with their local schools about what's going on. We're seeing parents really emerge as an important political voice in this country. And so I think schools are going to be listening even harder, if you will, right now to parents.
All right. Well, Heather, thanks for that report. And let me underline, let your voice be heard. You can be heard at the local school board, at the local city council, with your state government. But you can also be heard at the federal government. Sometimes we think the bureaucracies aren't going to respond. But if enough people raise their voice, you can actually force it. In other news, extreme weather continues to ravage the country. John Jessup has more from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right, Gordon. Residents in the Midwest are recovering after severe flash floods swept through the metro St. Louis area Tuesday, stranding people on roads and in their homes. The historic flooding came after thunderstorms unleashed heavy rain across St. Louis and surrounding areas. In some places, dropping a foot of rain in less than 12 hours, trapping many on highways. Firefighters and other first responders rescued more than 100 people as roads and apartment buildings were overtaken by floodwaters. One person was found dead inside a flooded car.
Our dispatchers are working overtime. Our police officers, our firemen, our SEMA, everyone's working overtime to handle this emergency.
The downpour caused by the severe weather system that's brought record heat nationwide. Millions in the Pacific Northwest are enduring a lingering heat wave. In Seattle, Washington, an excessive heat warning is in effect where just 44% of residents have air conditioning. Well, here in Washington, lawmakers are looking to help the struggling economy with legislation aimed at creating new jobs and improving supply chain issues. Known as CHIPS Plus, the bill would provide roughly $52 billion in funding for American companies to produce semiconductor chips here at home.
The pandemic made clear with unforgiving clarity how America's chip shortage was creating a crisis in our economic and national security. This morning, the Senate will draw a clear line in the sand that America's chip crisis and America's dwindling commitment to science and innovation will not continue under our watch.
A procedural vote on the bill passed the Senate Tuesday 64-32. Supporters hope the bipartisan legislation will clear a full Senate vote and then quickly pass the House with the goal of getting it to the president's desk before lawmakers leave town for August recess. Well, the Federal Reserve is set to address soaring inflation by raising interest rates again today. Many Americans want to know, is recession around the corner? The Biden administration says no. That denial, though, stands in contrast to recent economic numbers. White House correspondent Abigail Robertson brings us the latest on where things stand with the economy.
As fears of an economic recession grow across the country, White House officials are trying to assure Americans that everything is fine.
This is not an economy that's in recession.
Sunday, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen credited the current economic slowdown to historically rapid growth in 2021. She pointed to the economy bouncing back from the COVID shutdowns and claimed we're not in a recession because the labor market is strong.
You don't see any of the signs now. A recession is a broad-based contraction that affects many sectors of the economy. We just don't have that.
President Biden is also trying to stay away from the R word.
My hope is we go from this rapid growth to steady growth. And so we'll see some coming down, but I don't think we're going to, God willing, I don't think we're going to see a recession.
The Federal Reserve is expected to hike interest rates by an unusually high 3/4 point this week for the second time this year to combat inflation. Steve Skanke, chief investment strategist for Keelpoint, told CBN News' Faith Nation consumers need relief from high prices.
Food consumers aren't spending less, they're just spending more of what they have on things that they need to have. So if the Fed's action can help with that, that'll be positive.
We are crippling ourselves.
Speaking at an America First Policy Institute event Tuesday, Republican economists and lawmakers criticized President Biden's economic policies.
Free spending, reduce regulation, make tax cuts permanent, and you'll unleash the economy. This administration is doing the exact opposite, and it is causing inflation.
Republicans believe inflation will be the driving issue in the 2022 midterm election.
We've already seen what they've done to wreck our economy with massive spending and crazy far-left socialist regulations. Stop the madness. Help is on the way in November.
Thursday, the Commerce Department is set to release a report which some predict will show a contraction in the American economy for the second consecutive quarter. If so, that performance is generally defined as a recession. Reporting from Washington, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Abigail. Gordon, back to you.
Well, I hate to say it, but it's really hard to believe Janet Yellen anymore. Last summer, she was saying, well, inflation is just this temporary blip. It's going to be gone by year end. Even though Larry Summers, another Democrat economist, was saying, no, the stimulus package is absolutely going to unleash inflation, and we've got supply chain issues. We've got huge demand as people emerge from the pandemic. Your policies are wrong. Your analysis is wrong. And so now she's saying there's no recession because the labor market is really strong. Well, are you paying attention to the headlines? Google, one of the most dominant tech companies on the planet, announced layoffs. And the reason they're announcing layoffs is the ad spend on Google search is going down. Why is the ad spend going down? Because people don't have as much discretionary spending. So are we heading into a recession? My prediction is the quarter is going to come out and everybody's going to say, oh, we are in a recession. And will it continue on for another quarter and another quarter after that? What is it going to take to reset this? But if you have policy leaders denying the obvious facts, you kind of scratch your head and go, well, who's in charge? Why is the administration spending time on social legislation and executive orders when it should be paying attention to our economy and what's happening to the average American? If you want a real signal of what's happening in our economy, look at what Walmart just reported. They missed their numbers. Their stock has taken a hit. It's gone from 150 down to the 120s. It's probably going to take another leg down. If Walmart is not hitting their numbers, that tells you Americans are really hurting. The consumer can't spend because it can't keep up with the gas bills, the energy bills, the food bills, the rent bills, all of the other bills that have increased. That's going to have an absolute drag on everything in the economy. The administration should wake up and wake up quickly.